Hello and welcome back to the channel everyone. 21st century has seen many revolutions. The latest are the Arab Spring or the revolutions that we have seen in the Middle East. The revolutions to outthrow the dictators and the existing regimes. We've also seen the Umbrella Revolution, the Black Lives Matter and the various likes of it. People fighting for personal liberty and people fighting for revolution. Today we'll be looking into the ideas of Edmund Burke and his concept on liberty and freedom through his work Reflections on the Revolution in France. Edmund Burke has a great relationship with India. He was the one who was the critic of the British colonialism. When the revolutions broke out in France, it carried great fascination, enthusiasm and goodwill around the world, as we have seen when revolutions broke out in the Middle East. This infectious philosophy started coming into and pouring into England, and people started discussing the idea of a similar revolution in England. This is what worried Burke, and this is what prompted him to write Reflections on the Revolution in France, an anti-revolutionary text primarily, but needs to be deeply understood. After writing of this text, it became highly popular in England, getting 10 reprints. But this book provoked a backlash, and people like Thomas Paine wrote The Rights of Man, and Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Man, and Edmund Burke was sidelined as being a reactionary. What followed in France was visible to the world after some time. The revolution in France gave rise to a military strongman, Napoleon Bonaparte, and what followed was the Napoleonic Wars. What Edmund Burke was against was the overpowering of any country by godless rationalists, and to him the after effects are more dangerous, not only to liberty, to freedom, but also to the political space. French Revolution was just a beginning. What followed in the coming century was the complete barbaric rationalist philosophy of Marxism in the 20th century, which ultimately led to a complete outthrow of the established order, of the established institutions, of the established order of morals, complete seizure and nationalization of the public property, an end of all rights that were built up through works of humans throughout different centuries, crushing the nobility and the church and disregarding the family as an institution or a building block of any society. This is what happens when Burke says to him the execution of King Louis XVI, where the Englishman saw the procession of King Louis being executed in the form of a spectacle. To him, this was like savages preparing themselves for a blood sacrifice. What the revolutionaries fail to understand, Burke says, is that government is not merely a means for the people to achieve their wants and need, but a government is also acting as a brake to their passions and reminding them of the conventions. When the people become the guiding force, the society is ultimately headed towards an oligarchy or a monarchy. That is, the solution to all the problems of the society is with a single man, offering a single great solution to all problems. And according to Burke, this is what happens when this is applied. It is the families, the institutions, the civil and the private institution that ultimately suffer as a result of this new idea. According to him, when a society is just brought up purely and only on logic and reason, it loses all its charm to beauty, elegance and taste. And according to Edmund Burke, the barbarous philosophy of reason ultimately ends up not in beauty, elegance and logic, but it ends in the philosophy of a hangman. This is what made the work of Edmund Burke and Edmund Burke more relevant in the 20th century, when communism and communist revolutions took over in the 20th century. Edmund Burke was the one who sympathized with the American Revolution, but he came on very high and hard on the French Revolution. He criticized the French Revolution but praised the American Revolution. Why this contradiction? American Revolution was an idea, according to him, that was preserving the liberty, the constitution and the religious institution, the morality that runs into the society. But according to him, the French Revolution was an idea that was primarily or basically rooted in the philosophy of reason and rationalism, the barbarism that follows. French Revolution gave rise to a world was de-Christianized, with attacks on priests, seizure of the private property of the dominant Catholic Church, and creation of an atheistic cult of reason. And that is why Edmund Burke was a great critic of British colonialism in India. He headed the parliamentary committee for the prosecution of Warren Hastings. According to him, the British colonialism in India was primarily for the means of the profit, and this ultimately led to the great institution that Indian society has built up over time. It rid them of all this and gave it a name of Enlightenment of India, or the people of India. And Edmund Burke believed that Britain had the moral right to restore these institutions that were lost. Ultimately, it was just a profit-making venture, which ultimately led to great barbarism of the 21st century, the partition of India, and what followed as a complete disruption of the public and the private institutions of this great country. According to Burke, beneath Britain's propaganda of civilizing India was a simple lust for enrichment and profit. And to him, the French revolutionaries, their claim of the big ideals that they were running for, actually it was an ambitious attempt to grab power and authority. The terror of 1793 to 94 saw 26,000 people executed, including 16,000 of them guillotined. And France had to go through two restorations of monarchy and the Napoleonic era, or the Napoleonic Wars, before the modern Third Republic was born. And the question that Burke asked, was it worth it? This is the question that we need to ask, especially in the context of the Middle East. The old institutions being destroyed, the public is in chaos, the complete society is in disarray, thousands and millions of people have died. Was it worth it? Who was behind? What was the actual intention of these so-called revolutions? Revolutions have to be a gradual process. It has to be what Edmund Burke says as evolution rather than a revolution. Rather than as a drastic attempt in a small historic framework, it has to expand through centuries to change the society, taking along the institution of freedom and liberty that any society has built up through ages of hard work and centuries of work. This is what needs to be preserved, and this is what is the idea of liberty and freedom by Edmund Burke in his writings, Reflections on the Revolution in France. This was all about Edmund Burke and his philosophy of liberty and his idea and approach to the French Revolution. If you like the content, if you feel that the content is helpful, do feel like sharing it with your friends and family. Subscribe to our channel. Hope to see you soon in the next video. Till then, thank you very much.